Welcome to the Be Better broadcast, where we bring you tips and techniques and strategies that will help you to live a more extraordinary life, both personally and professionally. And we love to bring you a lot of different expert guests who are experts in all different fields to help you to do just that. And today is no exception. Today, we're going to be speaking with a master of persuasion, a master of influence, somebody who talks and lives and breathes influence and persuasion and leadership, because really leadership is influence, right? And we're all influencing people every single day of our lives, whether we are parents, whether we're leaders inside of a company, whether we own a business, whatever it might be, we are influencing people in one direction or another. And as you know, I've been in sales for years and years and years. And these are a lot of these tips that we're going to talk about. I learned through the years of doing it. But what if you could take all that knowledge and condense it into 30 to 45 minutes of conversation between myself and the true expert in the field, Mr. Johnny Ball. And as always, if you find any value in anything that we share in this episode, share this with a friend. It's the only thing we ask. It's the only price of admission is to share this with a friend if you take something away from it. So without further ado, let's speak with our friend, Mr. Johnny Ball. And for those who don't know Johnny Ball, he is the host of Speaking Influence, the podcast about the psychology and application of influence and persuasion in life and business. He is a persuasive presentations coach and a professional speaker on topics like podcasting for thought leadership, ethical persuasion, which we're going to talk about, and how to get your message noticed. Johnny is an online coach and course creator with 12 years of coaching and training experience with T. Harv Eker, the president of a business networking club in Valencia, a leader and speaker within the Toastmasters organization, and an entertaining and engaging guest, which you're going to see firsthand, with many stories and a wide range of life experience. He is a sci-fi nerd, an audiobook addict, and he loves to kayak, he loves his dogs, he loves board games, and he wants to try stand-up comedy. So without further ado, Johnny Ball, it is a pleasure to have you here, my friend.
Brandon, it's great to be chatting with you.
So I got to ask you, stand-up comedy. When are you going to jump into this world? Have you already done it? What's your plan?
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Here's the thing with stand-up comedy. I have been doing a lot of groundwork on that this year. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a lady called Judy Carter. She has a really cool book called The New Comedy Bible, which is an updated version of a book that she's had out for a long time, where she helps people to become funnier. Now, she's someone who does a lot of engagements and workshops for organizations like Toastmasters. She's also worked with some of the world's funniest and some very well-known comedians, people you would have heard of. And so I am learning from an expert, and I have actually enough material to put together a 10-minute set. And so wow. It's happening, but I don't know exactly when yet.
That is absolutely incredible. And I wanted to ask you that because I know influence ties into everything. And comedy is no different, right? Comedy influence is so important because you're literally influencing someone's mood in a second-by-second basis. So how have you found, just from what you studied, from Judy Carter's book, from putting your set together, how have you found that influence ties directly together with comedy?
It's a great question, and I've actually done some shows on my podcast with some comedians, professional comedians, and some professional speakers who are known for being humorous speakers. And that is a question that I've asked them too. Now, what I've come to decide of this, and it may be an evolving position, but where I stand with this is that humor has the potential to create great rapport with people, and rapport is a key element in the trust equation. So if you're looking to have influence with people, having people trust you and probably like you as well, because we tend to like people who can make us laugh, then you are already putting yourself in a position where you have a relationship with people. So it's about that connection that you get to have with your audience, whether that's in a social group or in a professional setting or in a public speaking or online setting. That is the connection that you start to make. I think there's a lot more to it than that, probably more than, we could do a whole episode really just about that. But it's one of the most overlooked elements of influence and persuasion. And so when it comes to all the people who study all the scientific and psychological sides of influence and persuasion, it doesn't get examined all that often. And I hear mixtures of opinions from this. Some people who think it doesn't really belong there anyway, and some people who think it does, and it's a really important influence tool. I fall on the side of thinking that it does belong in there, and anyone who can add humor into their lives and into their interactions, public and private, is probably going to have a much smoother ride in life. So long as you do that in appropriate measure and appropriate timings, in a way that actually fits with the audience that you have, whether that's your husband, wife, partner, children, or whether it's your professional organization or a universal group of people who you don't even know. But it's such a powerful tool, and there's a whole theory of comedy and humor behind it, what works, what doesn't work, why some things work, what makes people laugh, but the connections that it makes, not just between you and the audience, but between the audience that you have as well, is phenomenal. So there are a lot of psychological studies showing that it does, much like storytelling, because a lot of comedy is that, it does start to synchronize people's neural responses. So people actually more tuned into the same kind of wavelength and having the same kind of neurological experience at the same time.
It's so true, and it's so fascinating looking at it from a different world, the world being comedy, because for years, and I think I told you this when I was on your podcast, for years I trained new salespeople, and the first step in the sales process that we talk about is what you said, building rapport, right? Becoming as much as friends with the person across from us as we possibly can in the short amount of time that we have while we're in that sales interaction. And I always recommended, listen, if you can inject humor, then people will love you. If you make them laugh, if you make them smile, then you're going to make them fall in love with you, right? And I also told people, though, if you're not funny, then don't try to be funny, because that will just turn out really awkward. And that was me for a while, because I'm not this naturally funny guy. Like when you hang out with me, we'll have a good time, we'll laugh, but it's not going to be just nonstop, never ending laughs like some natural, funny, comedic people that you'll come across. But I started finding these lines, and I started finding these go-tos that I knew would make people laugh just from past experience that I would go to and resort to when I did want to inject a little bit of humor into the process itself. So
I think that's where it starts. I think everybody has the potential to be humorous, even if you don't think you're a funny person, even if you've never told a joke in your life, or when you have, it's just sort of landed flat. It's still worth giving it a go. Get some help. Speak to people. There are comedy workshops, stand-up comedy workshops, where you actually can learn how to add humor in. There are public speaking workshops where you can add humor into public speaking if you don't want to go down the stand-up route. But anyone who can add something like a bit of humor and levity into their interactions, especially in sales situations for sure, you are going to increase your connection with people. People are going to relax more. They're going to have a nice time while they're with you, and you will probably enjoy it more too. I think you have to be willing to risk that it's not always going to work. Sometimes it'll fall flat. And also when you start doing it, it's going to be maybe a bit uncomfortable or strange at first, and you will get better at it. There is a way of thinking that comes with this that also gives you more flexibility in your thinking. So as I say, there's a whole area that we could go into in it, which we won't, but it is a whole different way of thinking that you can train yourself into.
Yeah, and not taking risks, that's the greatest risk of all. So just go for it, see what works, and then just use what works, use what you found works. So I'm curious, how do you personally define influence and persuasion? Are they the same thing? And why is the skill of influence and persuasion so important for both leaders and for people that you work with when it comes to sharing their message?
Okay, so we'll take the first bit of that as to what influence and persuasion are, and they are context dependent to some degree as well, but they are separate things, although they are very closely related. I tend to frame influence more as being something that you have, and persuasion as being more something that you do. So you need to have a level of influence to have effective persuasion. You need to, for example, if you're a public speaker, you need to be on a stage, you need to probably look and sound appropriate to what you're doing to have the gravitas or the connection, because people are already making associations. From the moment they see you and hear you, they're already deciding who you are and if you are the right person to be speaking. But if you look right and you sound right and you seem confident in what you're doing, which is probably even more important, you already have a level of authority because you are the person who's up in front of a whole load of people talking about something that you are claiming to know about.
I've never heard it said that way. Influence is something that you have, something that you embody. But like you said, though, it's also contextual. Like you might have a great level of influence in the workplace, but in your community or even in your home, you might have a very different level of influence depending on the people that you are around. And persuasion is something that you do. So would you say that influence is a skill or something that is more of a character trait than a skill?
A bit of both. So it's not true to say that it's exclusively something that you have rather than something that you do. People do influence other people, but people can passively and actively influence other people. But for example, you take somebody like the Queen of England. She has influence because of her position more than anything else. She has a whole history behind her, and so she has that level of gravitas and influence automatically because of who she is and the status that she has. So then people will take much more seriously something that she says. People want to hear what she has to say. Every year on Christmas Day in England, everybody's tuning in to hear what the Queen has to say. So how persuasive that is really depends on the level of respect you have for her status. Like, not everybody in England supports the royal family, for example. So they may not agree with so much with what she has to say or really care so much about her influence or status. So persuasion and influence are tied in together, but they're not something that you can just say, well, that person has influence and that person can persuade everybody. It's very subjective and very contextual.
Yeah. Now so we know that influence is more of a character trait. It is a skill that you can improve. Persuasion now. Now, I've always found that I've been a naturally persuasive individual from a very young age, especially in the sense of I've been able to hold people's attention. And it goes to what we talked about earlier with storytelling. I've always been one who just starts to tell a story, and that creates all these neurological connections and all those things. Would you say that you have always been someone who's naturally been persuasive as well, or did you find yourself going into this field because you wanted to improve in that area?
I think I was. I think I've always had some element of natural ability in persuasion. I don't know that it's so much from a storytelling side originally, but I think I've always been very good at convincing people of things, and I think some of that has been because I'm a very fast thinker, so I tend to think of things very quickly. I think on my feet really well, and so I've always been able to adapt and say the right thing in the right situation or see where I needed to take things. So I think that's been very helpful to me. But I do think generally the skills of persuasion can be learned, and it's important to differentiate between persuasion and manipulation. Because we are all persuading all of the time, and we can all manipulate all of the time as well, but tend to view manipulation as the more cynical and self-serving side of persuasion, whereas like you are trying to get your own way regardless of whether it's right for the person who you're trying to persuade. Whereas ethical persuasion, which is what I talk about, is about helping people to add value to their lives, giving them what they need rather than what you want them to have or buy from you. So I see them as, whilst they are lumped in together very often, there is a good side and there is a not so good side.
I completely agree with that. And I heard something that Jordan Belfort said a while ago. And for those listening, Jordan Belfort is the Wolf of Wall Street, right? If you haven't seen the movie, then I'm sure you've heard of the Wolf of Wall Street. Someone asked him a long time ago, if you could change anything that you did, what is it that you would change if you could go back in time? And he said, I wouldn't have taken the first step over the line towards being unethical. He says, because once you take the first step over the line of not doing things in an unethical way, then it's easier and easier. And the line then moves. And now you're constantly moving the line more in the direction. It's almost like a momentum of persuasiveness. If you have more momentum influencing and persuading people to do something that is only good for you, you just become better and better at that. And it's just like a perpetual cycle of doing so. And you have to break that cycle. So rather than breaking the cycle, just don't take that first step in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's potentially a good example of how we need to persuade ourselves as well, and how good we can be at doing that. Because it often gets everybody is the hero of their own story, and yet we may well be the enemy in someone else's. So it's important to think about it like we will always find ways to justify what we do, and that is right, even when they're not necessarily ethical. Well, I did it because of this, or it may have been the wrong thing to do, but and so we will find ways to keep ourselves thinking good about ourselves. And if we start to lose that, then we can really spiral down, and people sometimes do. It's essential that we keep our sense of self, but we can play all sorts of mental gymnastics on ourselves to try and justify the things that we do in our lives, rather than sometimes maybe hopefully get into a position which hopefully someone like Jordan Belfort has, where you look back on your past and think, that was wrong, I own that, I accept that I did all these wrong things, and that's not what I do now. I have learned from that. I'm doing better to be a better person, and so this is how I am, and this is how I show up now.
Very interesting. So I love how you took it that direction, because I never thought of it that way, but we really are persuading ourselves every single day. If you think of what willpower is and determination, it's really, in a sense, positive persuasion. Obviously, it depends on the context. What are some ways that you personally persuade yourself on a daily basis? How do you use this in your own life?
I do, some people might call it outdated technology, but I do use declarations. I do have my daily declarations. In fact, just this week, I've updated them. As I'm thinking, I was working with a group last week where I was helping them create some personal declarations for themselves. And so I thought, this is actually a good reminder to me to update mine. Because I was feeling, there's a few things coming up for me right now. And I think I need to look at what they are, do a bit of mental weeding in my mind garden, pull out the weeds and let the flowers flourish. And so I had to identify the weeds that were growing up and decide what flowers I wanted to plant instead whilst I pulled those weeds out. So I use declarations on a daily basis because I think what we say to ourselves is important. Repetition is a key part of influence and persuasion. And so hearing something over and over again, whether it's a message from a marketing message from outside of you, a political message from outside of you, the more you hear it, the more likely you are to believe it, especially if it doesn't get challenged. Similar with things to ourselves, it is a form of mental programming ultimately. So you should be careful what you say to yourself about yourself, because that's what you're more likely to end up believing. So we're not computers as such, but we are susceptible to programming. We are susceptible to suggestibility. And so what with hypnosis being something that we do to ourselves, ultimately, declarations are a form of self-hypnosis. And to me as well, like some of the declarations I have are more about how I want to show up in the world, or how I want to be thinking about things as well. So they're a reminder to me, like, this is who I am. This is who I am choosing to show up as in my life today at this time for these reasons.
Now, these declarations, these things that you repeat to yourself, how have you noticed them helping you in your life? Like when you decide, okay, this is going to be my new declaration. Obviously, you've been using these for quite some time now. At what point do you notice, wow, these are actually working? This is helping me.
When I don't automatically go to the negative in the things that I've been struggling with, that's where I start to realize these declarations are working. If I try and give you an example of something like, if I, for example, in the past have been procrastinating about stuff, and I think, I just procrastinate about it. All I ever do is procrastinate, and can beat myself up about it, as I have done in the past, and probably everybody, including yourself, has done at some point in their lives. We all procrastinate at some point, and we all have this conversation with ourselves, which we may or may not be conscious of, that we are a procrastinator and that we keep procrastinating. Well, changing that conversation, say, I'm someone who takes action sooner than later, or as soon as I possibly can. And then you start finding those opportunities to make that real for yourself, you start to see that you are changing the conversation with yourself. Like what you are telling yourself you are is hopefully how you're showing up to be, because you're reminding yourself and instructing yourself to show up in your life in that particular way. You are less likely to go down those other routes. Even if hopefully you have a moment of conscious awareness where you say, all right, I'm not doing that. Remember my declaration. I'm not doing that. I take action now.
I love that. And I remember when I was 21, I was anxious, I was depressed, I was heavily overweight, I was in tons of debt. And one of the first things I did really to turn things around for myself wasn't necessarily declarations at first, until I read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, where he talked about autosuggestion, which is exactly what you're talking about right now. Just repeating something to yourself over and over and over and over again until you believe it. And this is how people out there can pass lie detector tests when really they committed the crime, but they've convinced themselves that it is not so by repeating it over and over. And I remember when I started to make this transition in my own life, I first became very conscious of my emotions, and I became very conscious of how I felt. And what creates emotions, and we talk about this all the time, is a thought that you have running inside of your mind, right? This self-talk that is happening behind the scenes that you might not even be aware of until you start to consciously look for how you're feeling and then ask yourself, I'm not feeling too great right now. What am I telling myself in order to create this emotion? And once I started to identify the negative persuasion that was happening inside of my mind, I didn't immediately try to change it, but I started to question it. And I started to question whether it was true. I started to question whether it was actually serving me. And little by little, it took months for, this transition to really happen, but it's a transition that completely impacted my life in a very positive way, to the point where within 6 months, I was able to release the weight. I was able to eliminate the debt within 8 months. And just being aware of that self-talk in your mind. But I love the idea of intentionally feeding yourself this positive self-talk, the self-talk that you want to embody, the self-talk that you want to possess.
Here's the thing with that, and this was a big one for me, and this has come from psychology research from, there's a book called The Luck Factor, and I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who wrote it now, Dr. Richard Wiseman. And so that book was profound for me, and it really is all about luck, what makes people lucky and what makes people unlucky. And they actually did a lot of research into this. Now, I can even remember some of it, because there was some stuff they did on UK television back in the time when I lived in the UK. And so I vaguely remember some of it from when I was younger. And the essence of it is that, first of all, they did a bit of research. Is luck a mystical thing? Or is it some sort of magical thing? And they kind of dismissed that very quickly. They had no way to really research that anyway. But what the research did start to reveal was that people who thought themselves to be lucky generally were, and people who thought themselves to be unlucky also generally were. And part of the reason for that is the story they were telling themselves. Lucky people tended to tell themselves that they were lucky, and because of that, they tended to act more in accordance with the belief and the story that they were telling themselves that they were lucky people. They took more of the opportunities. They expected things to work out. They did more stuff that made them experience things more like a lucky person. And if something didn't go their way, it didn't change the story for them. They still considered themselves to be generally lucky people. On the flip side of that, then, was all the unlucky people who believed that good things didn't happen to them, were less likely to take chances and to try themselves for opportunities because they've already decided they're not going to be lucky, even to the point of not noticing something like some money that was on the street right in front of them, or opportunities that were right under their nose. And this has been done in various experiments. There's a great TV show with mentalist Derren Brown from the UK, which I think you can still find on YouTube, where he explores all of this. But the reality is, being lucky or being unlucky comes down to your belief as to whether you are lucky or unlucky. And so the stories we tell ourselves are always persuading us. So of course the stories we tell other people are going to be persuasive to them too. Some of the greatest persuasion on the planet has all come from stories, and certainly the ones in our heads are no different.
Wow, fascinating. Believe it and you shall see it, right? A lot of people say, when I see it, I'll believe it. Well, in order to see it, you got to believe it. I mean, our brains are deleting out 90 something percent of everything we're seeing at any given moment based on what we're focused on, based on what's most important to us, based on what's going to help us survive. Absolutely love that. So I'm curious, how did you find yourself in this field of diving into the world of influence and persuasion? What's your personal story, Johnny?
It's a curious one because I think the influence and persuasion for me ties in a lot with public speaking and presentation skills, but they didn't start together. So whilst I was certainly already doing some kind of performance work and some kind of presentation stuff when I was younger through various things, it wasn't a formal thing of me deciding I wanted to be a speaker or anything like that. That came much later on. But the influence and persuasion side started quite a bit younger when I was doing research and I got more into self-improvement. That had started from my journey into studying martial arts. I used to study kickboxing and kung fu, and part of that, there was a big part of that was personal development. So we're getting into goal setting and making ourselves better, not just physically, but mentally. And I came across this site called Simpleology. It's a guy called Mark Joyner. He has lots of different courses and programs in there, still going, still quite a well-known guy in the industry. And one of the things he had was this book called Mind Control Marketing. And so I was really interested in it. I started reading it, and that was the first time I had this idea that there was a whole load of influence and persuasion going on under the surface that we were mostly unaware of or ignorant of. And that to me was fascinating. Like, psychology has always been fascinating to me anyway, but this aspect of it particularly was very interesting to me. And I really wanted to know what are the ways that I'm being influenced that I don't even know about. And as someone who has several times experienced that being conned out of money by people, I wanted to know how that worked and why I had been susceptible to that. And also I wanted to know if some of this was good for me as well. Like if some people were using these invisible skills and these magics for good too. So that was really the start of the journey, reading that book from Mark Joyner, which is still a useful book. It's still on my Kindle and something that I will happily refer to. But then I went on to read people like Robert Cialdini and Robert Greene and other experts in influence and persuasion, and learn even more about it, that it's become one of my primary interests. So I say it's bordering on obsessive, but it's a valuable interest for me. And when I got into public speaking and presentation skills, and also especially into teaching that, I didn't necessarily recognize at first how closely related they were, but then when I started learning about things like rhetoric and other sort of devices in public speaking, that I realized actually these are really, really closely related. And so when I started my own podcast, Speaking Influence, that was really the mission behind it, marrying up those two important areas to me, my big passions of presentation skills and public speaking, along with influence and persuasion, and having a show that really explored lots of different sides and aspects to that.
I love how you jumped into this world in order to see how you yourself were being influenced by these invisible forces all around us, whether it's marketing and advertising and other people influencing us.
Don't you want to know if somebody's doing something to you that you don't know about? Don't you want to know what it is? I did. And so, yeah.
I love that. So that book, the first one that you read, is called Mind Control Marketing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's generally available. I think you might actually have to buy it through Mark Joyner's own website. But yes, it was a good book. Although, if you want a book that is readily available, it would always push people towards Robert Cialdini's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, and the new version of it as well, which has so much great updates to it.
Robert Cialdini. Okay, very cool. I'm gonna dive into that. I'm curious, what was your favorite Robert Greene book that you've read?
It's a tough one. I just read The Laws of Mastery, and that was great. I got a lot out of that. But gosh, I think probably I'm going to forget all the titles now. But he does have one that's much more about influence. So like I read the one about seduction. 48 Laws of Power, I think was probably my favorite one.
Absolutely incredible book. Some parts of it, I've recommended that book to people and they've been like, well, this is a very dark book. He talks about, influence in not quite great ways and how it was used. And it's like, well, yeah, he tells those stories and how it was used because these were real occurrences in the history of our world. And these are still being used all around us every single day. So don't you want to know about them? So like you said, you can be prepared for them and you can notice them and you can see when other people are using them, not against you, but in order to persuade you in one direction or another.
Yeah, I mean, Cialdini talks about it a bit as well. And Robert Greene is very much his writing style is almost amoral. It's like there's no judgment there as whether it's good or bad. It's just presenting it to you, and he'll present one side of it and then a reversal. And so he has a style of doing this, but he doesn't tend to be judgmental in it. He's just presenting the information in a way that I think is very understandable. Cialdini does talk about the ethics of influence and persuasion a little bit, and I think he started doing that around maybe before, but certainly I noticed it around the time he released his book Persuasion, which was a follow-up to Influence and Persuasion, which is all about how we set people up for persuasion, and that is more the influence side of things, really. That you are creating the influence or the situation to be able to have persuasive power over other people. So what he was saying about that was that the people who were going to use this stuff unethically, they're going to figure it out anyway. They always have throughout history. They will become the con artists, the thieves, the politicians, whatever. But they're going to, it's very cynical, I know, but they're going to figure it out for themselves, or the mechanisms are already there for them to learn it from the people who've already been passing that on to other people who do similar things. So this really is more about understanding that influence and persuasion themselves are neither good nor bad. They like anything. It's a tool. You can use it for good. You can use it for bad. You can use an axe to chop wood for a fire and keep people warm and alive through the winter, or you can use it to chop down somebody's house and leave them homeless. You can build or destroy, and so you have to think about it the same thing with this as well. They are tools. The intention of the user is important. I aim to only try and bring people into my environment and community who want to use this stuff ethically. And I also believe that being educated about this is also a defense against the dark arts of influence and persuasion as well. If you have more of a chance of recognizing when you are being manipulated, when influence and persuasion is being used not to your greater benefit, but for what someone else wants, I think you have more of an opportunity, at least, to be able to take the step back and say, I see what's going on here, and that's not for me, and protect yourself from it. So I do see it as being defensive as well as being a very powerful tool to help people put good stuff out into the world. Like the original creators of rhetoric, Aristotle and Plato, they were guys who really wanted to see this. They recognized it could be used for not so good stuff, but they really wanted to see it being used for people to put good messages out in the world. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius, where he said that people, their speaking, their influence should be transformative, not just entertaining for people. We want people to transform and have real meaning to what they're doing. Now, I think you could have a bit of both, actually, but maybe not as a Roman emperor, but as a speaker in modern times, whether it's a podcast or a live show on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever, or whatever your platform is. A bit of entertainment as well as some information is a really good way to go, and very, very influential. But we must understand that these are just tools. And yes, there are going to be people out there who are going to use them for their own ends to get what they want, and they don't care about other people. They just want what they want. But there are also hopefully going to be more people, if we learn about these and share these tools with people, who are going to be able to put good messages, good things, good products, good services out into the world that are going to make things a better place for everybody. And that's what I want to be a part of.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that everyone adds these tools to their toolbox, especially those who are listening to us right now, salespeople, coaches, entrepreneurs, influencers, speakers. It's so important because what if you could speak to the same amount of people, yet your message reaches them in a deeper way that helps them to apply it to their lives in an even more beautiful way. I think if you have a message to share, it's almost your duty to become as persuasive as possible in order to get that message across to the people you're speaking to. So let's talk about practicality. And I know context is very important. So there's going to be very limited context here, but let's say you have a speaker, a coach, a consultant, content creator, whatever. They come to you and they say, Johnny, I've only got time for one session with you. And in this session, I would love for you to help me to become more persuasive. What are the things that you're helping this individual become conscious of to immediately up their own skill in persuasiveness and influence?
One thing you have to become conscious of right away is yourself. And a lot of the time in life, we don't spend that much time thinking about ourselves, not in this way anyway, where you're actually thinking about how you're showing up. Rather, we just tend to go there and do it. And we tend to run on automatic. We just do what we normally do. So this is the first thing, is to stop you running on automatic, bring some conscious awareness into it, and check in with yourself. What's my energy like here? What's my intention for the interaction that I'm about to have? So if you're about to go into a sales conversation, for example, with somebody else, I want to be more persuasive in a sales conversation. What would somebody like Johnny say to me in terms of being more persuasive? I'd say, well, okay, first of all, let's take the stress around sales off the table. Let's not go in there and be stressed. I have to make a sale, because that's going to make you tense. It's going to make them tense. So let's relax a bit and find ways to be more naturally yourself. Now, I know some people kind of rail against the word authenticity at the moment. It does get overused. It does get misinterpreted. So I say more about being true to yourself, to who you are, and being a bit willing to have connection and vulnerability with the person you're with. That doesn't mean telling them all your deep, dark secrets. It just means being a real person with them and connecting with them on a human level, rather than connecting with them as the image of the mighty salesperson or I am the super coach, the very best that there is. That's not what people buy into. So if you have that image and you're trying to be like, I am super coach, I am super speaker, I am super salesperson, and you're trying to live up to what you think that should be, you're not necessarily being yourself, because unless that's naturally who you are and where your personality goes, you have already put a barrier up to connection with the other person. So that is actually going to affect the level of influence and persuasion that you have with them. You don't have to become best friends with everyone in every situation or make those deep level connections necessarily, but people can spot fakes a mile off.
Wow. I remember talking about this on your show too, when we talked about modeling. And we talked about when I first started speaking, I realized I absolutely loved it, but I became very, very similar to the people that I watched constantly. Like I started to become like a miniature Tony Robbins, and it got to the point where people started to notice that, and they're like, oh, well, and years ago, I remember someone actually said, it's like you're always performing. And I said, if the way that other people are perceiving me is that I'm always performing, then that's not really giving off a very authentic message to people. They're thinking that I'm constantly putting on a mask. So I learned to not completely remove those things that I was doing that made me similar, because I want the high energy. I want to be able to give insights that help people to change their life. And I wanted to move in a way that was persuasive, but it got to a point where it wasn't authentically who I was. And it was only when I started to, and I'm still getting better at this every single day, started to be more myself, that people started to really listen to what I was saying. People started to see me as the human versus me as an actor or a performer. Do you believe that there is benefit in modeling who you want to perform more like, or should you always start from just simply finding your own way?
I don't know how much time I want to go into this, but I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. I got into NLP and things very early on, really, not early days, like I wasn't there studying with Bandler and Grinder or anything like that, but fairly early on compared to most people. Like I was studying it probably 15 years ago.
Wow.
And so it's not new concepts to me, but at that time, I was very aware of people when I was initially in the personal development industry, teaching the old fake it till you make it kind of stuff. And again, in the right context, that's fine. But in the context they were doing it, it was bankrupting people, trying to show up in the flashy suits and the sports cars and all that they had all loaned money, borrowed money to try and look like they were these millionaire or billionaire business people, and of course ended up causing problems for themselves. And of course, that wasn't where they were truly at. But beyond that, where you're modeling people, I saw also people getting lost in the people that they were modeling. And so they wanted to be, let's say they wanted to be more like the person you see on the stage at a big event. And this is certainly something I saw. I heard an example of somebody talking about a famous hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson.
Yes.
People trying to be more like him as well, like just by dressing like him. I don't know if anyone actually went as far as sitting in a wheelchair like him or anything like that. But you know, this thing of really taking the modeling stuff too far. There was a film in, I think it was the 80s, called Single White Female, Bridget Fonda film, really good film. And her character takes over the life of this other person she's jealous of, and she wants to be like her. She starts cutting her hair like her, wearing her clothes, stealing her boyfriend. Eventually she steals her whole life. And that's kind of what it ends up being like, turning yourself into someone else, but it's not you. And unfortunately, I saw some people lose who they were from trying to be too much like somebody else. Does that mean I'm against modeling? No, because I think there are qualities that we must recognize that we maybe want to embody more. If you see qualities in somebody else or abilities in somebody else, you think, I would like to be more like that. Modeling what they do or how they show up could be good. And that's not then inauthentic to you. You're not trying to do it as them necessarily straight away. Although you might, for example, comedians could be a good example of this. Somebody who wants to perhaps be as funny as someone like Robin Williams, they might actually try and copycat a Robin Williams routine. But if they go out and perform it, it's not going to go well. But in terms of learning to be funnier for themselves, I don't think they're going to try and convince themselves that they are him or anything like that. And they're certainly not going to convince a crowd of that. But it can give them that flexibility in learning how to do things the way that a great person did it. Learning to do a speech by somebody who had a very famous and successful speech, trying to be more like them when you deliver it. Great. It's all good in terms of practice for giving you some range and flexibility, but ultimately it should all be leading you to finding your own way of doing it. But if you start trying to turn your whole personality and character, let's say I want to be like Elon Musk. I don't, but let's say I did. then I start watching videos of him, reading books about him, trying to dress like him, trying to look more like him, trying to go to places that he goes to, and essentially being inauthentic to myself because I'm trying to be him instead of being me. It's not going to magically make me into him. But if there are qualities from him that I think, oh, I'd like to be more like that, or I'd like to do something, maybe I watched an interview or maybe something he says or does, I want to be able to do that. Modeling what he's done, how he's done it, could be a good place to start. But trying to turn yourself into them, that is not good. It's not healthy. I think there are all sorts of psychological reasons for that professional psychologists could probably give you more insight to. But that's my take on the whole modeling thing. I don't think too many people in NLP are teaching it in that sort of unhealthy way anymore. Thankfully, hopefully nobody is. But I certainly think you have to be aware of what you're modeling and for what purposes. Because if it's stuff that you recognize that you just want to be more of yourself, don't make it that you're trying to put aside who you are or who you've been. Add these things into your life for who you want to be and make them a part of you in a way that's right for you, not in the way that's right for them.
Wow, so eloquently said, by the way. I love that. Embody the qualities and characteristics of the person that you admire, that you respect, that you want to incorporate into your own routine, your own way of being, but don't necessarily copy and model absolutely every single thing about that person. Find what's great about you already and then embody those additional characteristics or even improve in that characteristic that you already possess in yourself.
Yeah, and there's an important thing here as well, and this is something that's been covered for me. It doesn't necessarily directly relate to your questions, although to me it does. People forget that not everybody you meet knows your life story. Most people don't. Most people don't know your history. They don't know the skeletons in your closet. They don't know what you've done well. They don't know what you've done badly. They just meet you and they start making their assessments of you from that sort of point onwards. So it's only us who bring the baggage with us if we choose to in those situations. And so I think it was Wayne Dyer, the late Wayne Dyer, he said something along the lines of like, we're always teaching other people how to treat us. I think that's true, but we tend to do that based on what we think they should think of us. I talked about the lucky, believing you're lucky or believing you're unlucky. If you believe a whole load of negative stuff about yourself, you are carrying that baggage around with you into every situation you're going in. And some part of you thinks that everyone can see it. But they only see it when you are exposing it, when you are showing it to them. So again, this isn't to say fake. It's just to say everyone doesn't see all the flaws and things like that we tend to focus on about ourselves. So let's at least lighten ourselves up in these situations and saying that's not what people are looking at. They're not looking at us and seeing everything that's bad about us. Some people will see good, some people will see bad, some people will be indifferent and open to open to influence as to which way they go with their decisions about you. But if you bring all the crap to the table and saying this is everything about me that is on my mind, and it's going to come out in your style, in your presentation, the way you communicate with people, the heaviness, the seriousness. It's going to indicate all these things that, if you're someone who takes life way too seriously, people are going to start making those judgments about you. If you're self-deprecating all the time, if you have really low opinion of yourself, it's going to come across, maybe not in even just what you say, but how you hold yourself. So this isn't, again, to say turn yourself into somebody else. It's like this is me saying work on showing up as the best version of yourself that you can possibly be in that moment.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's an incredible way to close the loop from what we began with declarations to lightening yourself up and giving yourself that self-talk and telling yourself what you want others to see in you. Love that. Absolutely incredible. So let me ask you now, Johnny, you've got your podcast, you've got courses, you help people to create purpose-driven podcasts or even liven up their podcasts, and you've got a persuasiveness quiz. You have a lot going on right now. So who do you love to work with and how do you help those people?
The people I love working with are people who are generally personal brand business owners. So they have a business that is where they are essentially the business, that's about them, it's about their teaching stuff, they're speaking about stuff, and maybe selling products that they are the face of. So those are the people who I love working with, and certainly not exclusively my clients, but many of them. That's the people who I tend to end up working with, because what I'm doing with them is helping them put even more good stuff into the world, helping them see where podcasts potentially fit into their professional business ecosystem, and making sure they can utilize that in a way that hopefully is going to set the people. I'm only going to work with people who have good intentions here, and I'm going to do some checking out. It's not just like, oh, here's some money, Johnny, come and work with me. It's like, no, we have to have that relationship first. I want people to be putting good stuff out into the world. I want to be a part of helping them make that happen. And I think podcasts are a great way to do that, a great way to have good people becoming thought leaders in their industries, in their sectors, having positive voices out there, combating a lot of the negativity that's around, people being prepared to deal with the contrarians and the polemicists who are around as well, and being able to change people's states. Like there's a lot of negativity around, especially after the last year or so, and but also political situations and everything else that's going on in the world. It's very easy to be defeatist, very easy to be down and in a very bad place with all of this. And doesn't have to be that way. We can actually be the beacons of light, the voices of hope for other people, the people who are putting good stuff and light and positivity out into the world with products and services and messages, and however we best do that. And that stuff changes the world, and that's what I'm helping people to do, being part of. So yeah, business owners, business people in executive positions, but not exclusively, but those are the people who I tend to target to work with.
That's an incredible mission. Your persuasiveness quiz I find fascinating. I think that's a great way for people to enter your world what can people expect to take out of this persuasiveness quiz that you created, and where can we find it?
So you can go to my website, presentinfluence.com, and it's probably the first thing you'll see. How persuasive are you? And you can take the quiz. It's completely free to take, and you can find out your level of persuasion. So whether you're somebody who struggles to get the dog to sit down, or whether you're somebody who's planning world domination, we'll get a level of what your level of persuasion is and where you can go from here. Everybody has somewhere to go, even the people who are already good at persuasive skills. Some of it ties in with you may be good at persuasion, but where's your ethics? Yeah. And so we just want to have that check in and see, well, where do you go from here? And if you're someone who's really not very persuasive and you don't have a lot of persuasion ability, or you're trying to be forcefully persuasive and demand your own way but not really getting it, then there's the definite lead into some of the programs from that.
That's amazing. Presentinfluence.com. Link is in the description. Go there to check out Johnny's podcast, check out the Persuasiveness Quiz, and really check out anything that you need at this particular time in order to share your message in a more eloquent and persuasive way. Johnny, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for taking the time, and I look forward to next time.
It's been fun.
That was a conversation with Johnny Ball, host of the Speaking Influence podcast, who also has many courses and who really has created an entire ecosystem that is designed to help you to become more influential, become more persuasive, because no matter who you are, you have a message, you have a story, you have a product that it's your duty to get this out to the world, but not just get it out to the world, but get it out to the world in a way that will help it to be received by even more people, so that you can impact more lives, so that you can positively influence other people to make the positive change that you are sending out into the world. So presentinfluence.com is where you can find more information from Johnny himself. The link is in the description. As always, if you found even one piece of information or one piece of value from this conversation, which I'm sure you did, we talked about everything from Johnny's favorite books about persuasion. We talked about the stories we tell ourselves. We talked about persuading ourselves through even the use of declarations. Just an enlightening conversation. And if you took anything away from it, share this with one friend who could use it as well. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.